What's up, y'all? My name is Fernando Deveras, and welcome to my YouTube channel. For those of you who have no idea who I am and have never seen my face before, allow me to give you a little background. I'm an educator and organizer from the city of Santa Ana, California, and for a few years now, I've been making online content through Instagram and TikTok to try to educate people about things like history, social issues, local politics, national politics, things like that. But for a while now, I've been wanting to make a YouTube channel where we can really have long-form interviews and conversations to unpack the kind of history that's led us to where we are today, and to talk to people from different walks of life, different fields, to learn about the kind of work that they're doing to make an impact in their community so that we can learn the lessons that they've learned. And I was recently fortunate enough to be approached by a candidate for president, Claudia De la Cruz, who's running for the party of Socialism and Liberation, a third-party candidacy which is trying to take on this two-party duopoly of Democrats and Republicans that has run this country for I don't know how long now. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Claudia De la Cruz. I'm really curious about what your experience has been like, because I've been following politics for years. When I was like in high school, college, I was like a CNN, MSNBC head. And then eventually I found, yeah, and then eventually I found more independent leftist outlets online. And so my politics have shifted a lot, but I've seen just the sort of the powerhouse that this two-party duopoly has, the Democratic Party, the Republican Party, the lobbyists, the billionaires, and how they really cripple any chances for independent parties, third parties, people-centered parties to have a voice in our political system. So I'm really just curious to hear from you what your experience has been like running for president. But before we get into that, just for anybody who isn't too familiar with your work, I want to just give you a chance to introduce yourself, who you are, what you're doing, and why you run for president.
Well, my name is Claudia De la Cruz, and I'm the presidential candidate for the Party for Socialism and Liberation. And in California, we are on the ballot with the Peace and Freedom Party. And I'm an organizer, I'm an educator, I'm a mom, and a theologian. I've been doing organizing work for a little bit over 30 years. I started doing organizing when I was 13. And I've done a lot of organizing in different fronts of struggle. So from immigrant rights to reproductive justice and women's rights, against police brutality and mass incarceration, around issues of tenant rights and housing. And so I've dedicated basically my life to political organization and political work outside of the electoral realm. And so this is the first time that I engage with elections in this way, running as a presidential candidate and as a socialist, which is a significant difference to other third-party candidates and also to the corporate duopoly. And I think one of the biggest reasons why I'm doing it is because there isn't necessarily anything in the two-party system that uplifts the demands of working class people. And obviously there's been a betrayal that has come mostly, I think, from the Democratic Party, because the Democrats are the ones that are put forth as the defenders of democracy and the defenders of people's, rights and all these different things, but they constantly betray the working class, and they betray them to be able to profit and to be able to advance the interests of the wealthiest people. And so deciding to run is in the legacy of a lot of socialists. Eugene Debs was a socialist that ran in 1920 and got 1 million votes from prison. And he was in prison because it was an anti-war activist, which is crazy, right? You would think that in a society that is normal, being an anti-war activist is a good thing because you're standing against the killing of other people. But he was in prison precisely because he stood his ground and he was a socialist and he organized in labor movement. So I'm running on that heritage, on that lineage that calls to question how we normalize a society that is so deeply sick. We're not running to legitimize the two-party system. We're not running to legitimize the so-called democracy in this country because there isn't none. If we were truly a democratic system in terms of electoral politics, we wouldn't have an electoral college. We would have one person, one vote, and people would actually have much more access to options beyond the two corporate parties. And so we're trying to, uplift the contradictions of what the ruling class calls the best and biggest democracy in the world, which we know isn't the case. And so I've been doing political work for a long time outside of electoral politics. And this time around, we thought it would be important to have two women on the ticket, Karina Garcia is the VP candidate for the Party for Socialism and Liberation from California. Chicana, who's been doing a lot of work in different fronts of struggle as well, and is also in the leadership of the party. The intervention itself, you asked the question, how has it been? It has been what we expected to be to a certain degree, and a lot of unexpected things have also happened. What we expected was that we were going to get, we were going to go into a fight, basically. We're going to go into a fight to be able to access the ballot boxes all across this country. We were able to get into 19 states. So we are in 19 states in the ballot, and we got 24 as legal writing status. So folks could write us, which is historical for a socialist campaign. It's the most access we've had as a party, but also the most access we've had in a long time as socialists generally. And so it's a huge win, I think, for the movement. And we expected to get some backlash. You know, the Democrats put out a fund of over $100 million that's specifically to kick off third-party candidates off the ballot. This is a year of most fights. They've challenged at least 8 different independent candidates, the most in history. They kicked us off the Georgia ballot after volunteers went out and petitioned and got over 17,000 signatures, which is twice as much as they required. They kicked us off the Ohio ballot and the Pennsylvania ballot. And as you know, those are swing states. We wouldn't even think about the concept of swing states if the Democrats were actually doing what they needed to do. People would actually be committed to the Democrats if they actually didn't betray people the way that they have done. And so even the concept of swing states is crazy, to me at least. Right. It reveals a lot. And in terms of what we didn't expect was to reach the level of support that we have. In many cases from mostly young people who are coming into politics now, who are developing a sense of their own identity as working class people, and who are developing a sense of consciousness in relationship to the world. This fight against genocide that has shifted the consciousness, I think, of not only the people of the United States, but across the globe in support of Palestine and Gaza has been a very historic moment to intervene in the electoral arena, giving people another option. You don't need to support war criminals, people who are riding shotgun to genocide, who are affirming a colonial apartheid state like Israel. There are options. And we're also engaging people in ideas of socialism and how do we practice that? How do we build organization? How do we build community? And more importantly, how do we practice our politics every day and not just every 4 years? And so I think this message resonates with a lot of people. Our platform resonates with a lot of people. And we've been able to gain over 7,000 volunteers all across this country that made ballot access possible for us. Folks that are going into communities, that are canvassing, that are doing outreach, and are spreading the message that the elections is just a small part within a larger strategy of organizing, because organized struggle is what actually has gained us whatever accomplishments we've reached. It hasn't necessarily been through elections that we've done it.
Something you were mentioning about how the Democrats are fighting so vigorously to kick third-party options like you off of ballot access. What is, and again, I got some other questions I want to dig into there, but just on that specific question, why do you think the Democrats are so scared of having an alternative option available if, there's this myth, and I think it's pretty clear right now in 2024 that it is a myth that we live in a democracy when we see people like Kamala Harris, who are the nominees for the Democratic Party, who never received a vote in a primary, who in 2020 had to drop out early because nobody was interested in her campaign. So again, I just want to ask you, what is your analysis as to why they're so afraid of having a third-party option available?
I mean, this system just generally is experiencing a crisis. And it's a crisis that is political and is social we experience an economic crisis as the working class people. We've always been in a crisis. The ruling class will always be well. They'll be well off. But in terms of where people are ideologically and where the ruling class is, there's a huge gap. There's a huge number of people that have become more and more progressive. And you mentioned some of what, your process was from CNN to now looking into independent media. There's many people like that. There's many people who have understood, having come from like the Bernie Sanders campaign, that all movements that go into the Democratic Party go there to die. And that is historically proven. 1940s, the Henry Wallace campaign was a very progressive one that was killed by the DNC. In 1980s, you had, Jesse Jackson twice. They killed it. Bernie Sanders, they sealed that twice. They killed it because they would rather move towards the conservative and far right than move towards the left. So you have a shift of the majority of people that is moving towards the left and progressive ideas. And you have a conservative class, which is the ruling class, that would rather move to the far right than give an inch to the left in this country. And I'm not talking about the left wing of the Democratic Party. I mean grassroots left people who are concerned about housing, who are concerned about healthcare, who are concerned about the environment, who do not want the development of cop cities all across this country, who are demanding the stop of state-sanctioned lynchings of Black and brown men all across this country. They don't want to engage with that because ultimately that is what they utilize as a bribe. That's what they utilize to blackmail us into voting for them every 4 years. They will advance some things and then they will take some things. It's a game, and then when we don't have access to abortion rights, for example, which was a reform that was won through organized struggle, through movement, they didn't give us that. People fought for that. They will, at any moment, allow the Republicans to take it away like they did and say, we will give it back to you. And then they won't. Because if they do give it to us, if they do concede, then they can't blackmail us into fighting for them. The working class is always expected to save the Democrats. Even if they don't love us, we need to save them. And so they fear that people are coming into consciousness of that and that we will no longer consent to have them govern over us. And that's why you see a Kamala Harris saying that the one thing that she would do different from Biden, believe me, there's a whole bunch of things that this woman can choose to do different. But there's the one thing that she does say that she will do different. And that is being able to place a Republican in her cabinet. They are willing to give voice, space, time to neocons like Dick Cheney, Ronald Reagan, the Bush family.
I saw a post today that said something along the lines of, I wish there was a party that didn't like Republicans. Or I wish there was a party for some people who don't like Republicans. Yeah. I think we talk about like the ratchet effect, right?
Yeah.
And that's how the system goes. Like you said, further to the right, Democrats are there to stop the bleeding and then really just kind of go along with what the project is. I wanted to just ask you too, because I know in leftist spaces, in socialist spaces, in Marxist spaces, I feel like something that I've run into, especially here in Orange County, where the political consciousness isn't necessarily as developed as we'd like it to be to talk about some of these issues around the root causes of poverty, the root causes of crime, the root causes of all kinds of issues that we see. When we use words like consciousness, socialism, Marxism, ruling class, etc., how do you navigate those conversations with people around the country who maybe aren't ready for that kind of vocabulary or that kind of conversation? What's your approach there?
I mean, as an educator and as a mom, sometimes what we need to do is describe. What does it look like? What does capitalism look like? Maybe not even use the word capitalism, but capitalism looks like misery. It looks like the conditions that our people experience. It looks like hyper surveillance in the communities that we're in. It looks like police brutality. It looks like our people being unable to pay rent because they're not earning enough money or having to choose between paying rent or paying a medical bill. That's what it looks like, And so I think sometimes as organizers and as people who are more conscious and people who have a language, sometimes we want to impose language on people. People know how it feels. People know what capitalism is because they experience it. And sometimes what we need to do is engage people with the language they know and also inform based on the language we have. That is called capitalism. And so I've been going across the country speaking to communities and speaking with communities that are in struggle. These are fighters. These are people who are working 50 hours a week, earning $7.25 an hour, living off, $50, $100 that are left at the end of the week, in parking lots, in cars, with families. That is the condition of our people. The condition of our people is in South Carolina. There's a community called Richland, which has one of the highest rates of diabetes-related amputations. Things that could be avoidable, but that capitalism does not place as a priority, which is healthcare. It has a profit motive. And so how we talk to people is based on their material realities. Where are they? And sometimes what we need to do is listen. And we can't just oppose. Yes, our people know that this system is messed up. They know that the system does not care for them. That's why sometimes in this election years, the people who get the most shade are the people who don't go to the ballot box. But we cannot judge our people for not engaging with a political system that does not respond to them. And they know it. And so they feel betrayed enough not to engage with it. So what do we propose is the question. And for us, the proposal is socialism. So when we go into Richland, to that community in South Carolina, and we're speaking to a man whose both legs have been cut off because of diabetes and the inaccessibility to medicine. And we're saying that's not normal and it shouldn't be that way. And actually, Cuba has medicine that could have saved your legs because they developed that medicine. And there's a blockade that prevents Cuba from sharing its medicine because the United States would rather hate socialism than get its people what they need. Mm-hmm. And so this person's response is not, I hate Cuba. This person's response is like, I wish I would have known. I wish I could have gone. And so we go into communities, we listen to the people, we speak and engage with the material conditions, and we provide an option. We need to be able to organize ourselves to take everything that belongs to us because the working class deserves everything because we produce everything. And people understand that. The question then becomes, how do we organize? And that is the challenge of organizers all across this globe and all across this country, because we can't just organize from our computers. We have to hit the streets. We have to be with communities. We have to build organization. We have to resolve problems amongst each other. Our people live every day, and they live because there's an organic way of organizing to survive. We need to be in that mix. We need to be in relationship to our people. And so there's no other way of relating that being in that organized struggle with our people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think something that stands out to me when you're talking about this, and like the issues that we're talking about have been around for decades and have only gotten worse and worse and worse. And mm-hmm. sometimes it's tempting, being someone who's fighting for these kinds of issues, to lean into doomerism and nihilism sometimes, where you just feel like the system's too much, it's too big. Mm-hmm. For me, it's been helpful to look back on history and examples of like the abolitionist movement, the fact that there was chattel slavery in this country and there's still slavery in a different way in this country. Mm-hmm. But the fact that there was a civil war fought to undo that system and people were suffering for centuries under that. And then I look to heroes who have kind of set an example for what we can do, what we can build. So I wanted to ask you, like, what are some of those movements that inspired you? And who are some of the teachers that you look to throughout history that keep you grounded, when we want to just throw our hands up and give up?
I mean, there's so many. But you know what really keeps me grounded? I mean, I could name many. For example, the Anti-Imperialist League that was formed in 1898 by Mark Twain and other folks who stood against the expansion of the U.S. hegemony in this continent and beyond. And we're saying Puerto Rico shouldn't be a colony of the United States. Hawaii shouldn't be a colony of the United States. Guam shouldn't be a colony of the United States. We need to move away from that. That movement, which was a U.S. anti-imperialist group, right? When they say that in order for you to be an American, you need to validate imperialism. It's false. There were a lot of socialist movements. From the beginning, there were a lot of socialist movements. In the labor movement, there were socialists, there were communists who were organizing and unionizing workers, building, tenant associations for women's rights to vote. I mean, you name it. Many movements. Harriet Tubman fears, understood, and she herself said, I could have freed so many more slaves if only they knew they were slaves. There was W.E.B. Du Bois, Claudia Jones, Paul Robeson. People mention James Baldwin, but don't understand that he was very politically sharp too. Had very, very, very clear politics. Malcolm X, the Black Panther Party, the Black Liberation Army. There's so many. The Chicana movement, the Brown Berets. I mean, there's so many. We could keep, but what really motivates me is working class people. Regular working class people. My mom woke up every day at 5 a.m. in the morning, and she was an educator for 35 years in the New York City Education Department. And my mom bought from her very, very short, small salary, she bought supplies to teach her children because the New York City Department of Education did not provide them. She looked for books outside of the system to be able to teach her kids real history. She brought in new tools to that space. My dad was a construction worker. Construction work without being unionized for a long time. Broken knees, broken hands, cracked. He was a laborer. And thinking about the millions of people that experienced that experience being squeezed by the economic system of this country, that contribute so much to the social, political, and economic life and are constantly scapegoated, that inspires me because they don't stop fighting. And they don't stop fighting because they are envisioning a better future. And we all have that. I do that for my son. I'm sure you do it for your kids too. And so that is an inspiration, not only the past, but also the future. I'm concerned about the climate catastrophe that we're experiencing. Why is it that North Carolina could be wiped off by a hurricane? And people are not, like, these leaders of this country are not concerned about that. That hurricanes are not supposed to hit North Carolina in that way. Or that we're not supposed to be experiencing the heat waves that we're experiencing when it's summer in the South, that people are dying when they're working. And so more than, it's a sense of urgency more than anything. Because if we don't do something about it, we are looking at the end of humanity and the end of the planet. And these people could care less about any of us. Because guess what? AI is also something that they have in their power, and they're going to utilize it to make profit. And so they're already replacing workers with machines. And so if we are able to have a clear consciousness of where we are, we should all be concerned and we should all be doing our part, and it's that concern, it's out of that urgency that we find discipline, because inspiration is a feeling. There are times where we feel inspired, and that's okay. And then there are other times when we don't. There are times when I don't want to wake up. Well, I don't want to get out of my bed, but there's a discipline. I need to, because guess what? We need to live. We need to survive. We need to build something today. I need to get my kid to school. I need to make sure he eats. I need to make sure he's clothed. And so there's a discipline behind our love for our people, a discipline behind our love for humanity and the planet that needs to motivate us to do what we need to do and contribute, because we can't do it all alone, but we can contribute.
I really love that, the discipline to look out for our people. Someone I look to a lot, Kwame Ture, and that's something that he talks about, that we have a responsibility to organize the masses of the people. If we really want change, we can't just hope for Superman to come in and turn things around. And I think that's something else. I think that's something else that I'm curious about. Like, when people see politicians or people running for elected office, I feel like there's that sense that this person's going to come in and turn things around. Or, even for you running on the socialist ticket, people might be looking to you like, okay, if she gets some traction, then maybe she's going to come in and turn things around. Like, what's your message to just everyday people who are sitting on the sidelines? And, I was also thinking about just what's happening in Gaza.
Mhm.
There's like a bystander effect right now with even people who are invested in the movement, who feel like something's going to happen, something's going to turn the tide, someone's going to come in and turn things around. Like, what's your message to just everyday people who feel like they don't know how to engage and make that impact that they're waiting for someone else to make?
I mean, we are the agents of society. We are the ones that need to do something. No one has ever done it for us. I think there are people who have sacrificed their lives. There are movements who have come and gone. There's a link, a lineage that we continue, but we have to be the ones to continue it. It doesn't continue by itself. And I think ultimately, for folks who feel like, again, there's a lot of cynicism that is imposed on us by capitalism. There is a sense of, what can I possibly do? It's too big of a problem. And it's a mindset that is an imposition of the capitalist system. I mean, we've been taught to think that the end of the world would come faster than the end of capitalism. Capitalism will only end if we end it. That's the only way it'll end. It has a very innate, organic, self-destructive mode of operating, but at the same time, it always utilizes working class people to get out of a crisis. That's what it does. And so if we don't deepen that crisis of capitalism, that is an economic and political and social one, if we don't do what we need to do, then of course capitalism will end. It will reemerge as something different.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like in so many ways, we don't acknowledge the power that we have. When workers go on strike, factories shut down. There is a need to come to the negotiation table and negotiate contracts. We have power. There was a movie called A Day Without an Immigrant. I don't know if you ever saw it, but it's like we can't even imagine how powerful we are. And the reason that we are oppressed in the way that we are is because we are powerful. And so the level of consciousness that we need, it doesn't come from an individual. Like Claudia is only Claudia, Karina is only Karina, Fernando is only Fernando, right? But if we are organizing collectively and we make sure that the voice is a collective voice, that the strategy is a collective strategy, that the political platform is a collective platform, it's not about what Claudia will do. It's about what we will do as working class people. Because there has to be a certain level of accountability, and accountability comes with work, not with words. What are you doing to hold other people accountable? Like, what work are you putting? What example? Paulo Freire spoke about the pedagogy of example. What are you teaching people to do? Because what we learn in this country is that just by saying we're socialists, we're socialists. Just by saying we're revolutionaries, we're revolutionaries. Just by saying we're progressive, we're progressive. Just by saying that we're against genocide is okay. I mean, AOC put a whole statement this week against the genocide. But what has she been doing? Is the question. Who has she been siding with? And so we need to be conscious of the fact that it's not about individuals. It's about a political and economic and social project. And how are we contributing is the question. It's not enough to go into the ballot and mark the box and say, I got nothing to do with politics for the next 4 years, for the next 2 years. How are you building the political confidence and the political strength of your people every day? And there are many ways of doing that. There's organizations that already exist. If you are a student and there's not a student organization in your campus, there's not a mecha, there's not like build a student organization that actually is politically clear and that connects to struggles outside of the campus. Utilize the power there. If you're a worker and workers are being exploited by this corporation, find out how to unionize and build solidarity with other unions that have been formed and strengthen that. And if you're in a community or in a community where there's high levels of police brutality and police surveillance, learn about that movement. How do we get our community to understand that we don't need to be policed? That we actually can organize community networks to be able to work with what we need to work in our communities without the level of violence and suppression that police bring into our communities. And so that's the only way that we'll be able to, one, learn how to fight, because we got to learn how to fight back. Two, deepen our consciousness and get a sense of community. Because one of the biggest weapons of capitalism is isolation. When people are isolated, then they could attack, and they could basically say that people enjoyed being attacked. With Gaza, there's so many lessons. Palestine has not stopped fighting for their independence, for their total liberation for 76 years. What we're witnessing now for the last year, it's part of an extermination campaign that is, again, over 76 years old. We are just watching it live streamed now. But imagine the things we didn't see. Imagine the voices we didn't hear before this year. And I've been doing organizing work again for over 30 years. I've been, since I was 17, and I'm 43 now, doing work around Palestine. And this moment is historic because people are actually seeing with their own eyes what many of us have been saying for so long. And people are actually moving into action in solidarity with Palestine. But the Palestinian people are their own political agents. They will win their liberation. And they are advancing that, sacrificing hundreds of thousands of people. So we cannot talk about transformation if we're not willing to sacrifice too. Mm-hmm. Malcolm X said, people talk very, very, very freely about revolution, but they're not willing to bleed. We should look into Malcolm. Mm-hmm. Malcolm said it. There's sacrifice. In every struggle for liberation, there's sacrifice. And so we might have to sacrifice our time. We might have to sacrifice our salaries. We might have to sacrifice our comfort. We might have to sacrifice other things, including our lives. But we need to be committed to the project of liberation. And that goes for everybody, not only Claudia, not only Karina, not only Fernando. It goes for everybody that is truly wanting to see a free world, free from capitalism and US imperialism and colonialism.
That notion that what you were saying, I think our limited imagination of what's possible as a result of capitalism and colonialism and all the isms and the division that it creates and keeps us separated. I know that you've talked before about the importance of international solidarity and connecting the struggles that we face here with the struggles of people on the other side of the world. The number one thing I hear whenever I talk about that, when we bring up Gaza and this and that, people who are maybe ignorant to the facts or just kind of not really plugged into the history there will always say, well, I got problems over here. Why should I care about what's happening over there? Let's take care of America first. And then we can worry about some country in the Middle East that they don't know where it is on the map. So how do you make that connection when I know here in Santa Ana, for example, we passed a ceasefire resolution in support with the people of Gaza. And there was a lot of opposition. Our mayor, her name is Valeria Mesqua, she was saying it's not my job to take a stance on something like this. And we were able to make the case and eventually got a resolution put forth, small steps, something that we felt would help inspire other people to take action and pay attention. But that notion that it's not my job, it's not my responsibility, it's not my problem. How do you connect that message as someone who's running for president, talking to people about, just, what do you call it, dinner table issues? They're worried about healthcare, they're worried about groceries, they're worried about their wages. How do you connect that to what's happening in Palestine?
I mean, the reason that we don't have any of that is precisely because there's enough money for war. We don't have any of what we need in this country because let's just think, in the last 76 years, the United States has financed the colonial state of Israel with over $300 billion. Not the people, but the US imperialists were able to sign off on $26 billion in the last year for the genocide of Palestinians. It takes $20 billion to eradicate homelessness in this country. For over 20 years of war in the Middle East, the United States invested in death and destruction that cost the death of 4.5 million people in the Middle East, Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, you name it. And it cost us, the working class people of this country, $21 trillion. That's a lot. Imagine the eradication of student debt. Imagine the eradication of homelessness. Imagine the development of infrastructure that could actually meet the scale of the level of climate catastrophe that we're experiencing. Meaning the possibility of having, roads that work, transportation that works. We're not even talking about the $1 trillion that are invested in the military industrial complex. We're not even talking about the billions of dollars that maintain 800 military bases all across the globe. We're not talking about the money that is gifted over $100 billion that were given to Ukraine to advance NATO, which is an instrument of war of the United States in that region. I mean, that's a lot. Where do we think all that wealth is coming from? And where do we think it's being divested from? It's being divested precisely from our quality of life. And one basic thing is that we should care about what happens to people in general, regardless of whether they're our bloodline or not, regardless of whether they're our immediate family members or not. We should care about human beings, and we should care about the planet. We should care about the babies that are being found under the rubble and the babies that have disappeared that haven't been found because of the bombings that are nonstop in Palestine. We should care. We should see our kids in those kids. We should have that humanity. But capitalism robs us of that humanity. And so that discourse of, why should I care because I'm dealing with X, Y, and Z? Well, you're dealing with X, Y, and Z precisely because the system could care less about you. And they actually could care less about the children in Palestine. And therefore, they will kill you in the same ways they kill them. You see, the same IOF, the same military forces that are raping babies and women and men in those torture camps in occupied Palestine are the ones training policemen and women that come back and kill our babies in these streets. The same forces. And so a lot of our people say they don't care, but a lot of it is that they don't know. Because once they know, is different. That's why the propaganda in this country is so huge and so intense. These people put in millions of dollars. I mean, Kamala Harris has been able to fund over $1 billion since she announced her campaign. And over 300 million of those monies are going to propaganda, to commercials. And so there's so much that goes on into ads that are against trans people, ads that are against immigrant people. A lot of cultural, ideological conditioning is happening. From mayors to governors to the scapegoats are the migrants. And it's almost like they took the script out of a playbook. They're all saying the same thing. And we need to ask ourselves, why are these people saying this at this time, at this moment? And I think for all of us who have our family members who obviously have diverse political views and relate to the world differently, being able to introduce new information is important. Ask them, well, if you're so concerned about migrants, like the housing crisis, did that not exist before the boom of migrants coming in? Were people not experiencing homelessness before then? Were people not experiencing lack of access to employment that actually paid wages that were, and it's true, people were experiencing these things before migrants became the scapegoat in society, because that is the system. Or let's talk about why did our families migrate? My family migrated because the US invaded my country, invaded my parents' country, the Dominican Republic in the 1960s, because they created political and economic instability with a dictatorship that lasted 32 years. Let's talk about that. we need to introduce information to our people. We need to engage and not do it in a judgmental way because people don't know, not because they don't want to know, but because it was been intentional. It's been an intentional misinformation campaign for many years. And so we need to be patient. We need to have revolutionary love for our people, revolutionary optimism that they will get it based on their own experience as working class people. But we can't just allow for all these narratives that have been imposed on us to be the ones that rule in our dinner table or in our streets or in our bodegas or in our workplace, because those are battlegrounds as well. And we need to win our people over.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that question about propaganda. I was listening to, I don't know if you're familiar with FD Signifier. He's a YouTube video essayist, but he talks a lot about politics too. And they were talking about how it's a challenge, not just if our people lacked education, that would be simple enough because we could provide that, fill that gap and provide the context and information and history that they might not be aware of. But like you said, it's not just a lack of education, it's a massive apparatus of misinformation that we're. So I, again, as a third party independent candidate, I imagine that's something that's a lot to overcome when you have these conversations and people are so propagandized to accept this narrative about housing and homelessness and drug addiction and migrants. I wanted to ask you specifically about the question of immigration, because here in the city of Santa Ana, we're a 78% Latino community. It's a very central hub for Latinos in this county. And right now we have a proposition, there's a ballot measure that's going to allow non-citizens to vote in local elections, which would be a first in the state of California. They have it like at a school board level, but this would be for municipal elections. But again, that question about immigration and who's worthy and who's not worthy, and what's the root cause of immigration and how you tackle immigration. I want to just ask you, like, on that question, what is your party's platform when it comes to the question of immigration, and how do you address those concerns that people are talking about, even if it's like fantasy that they're bringing up, dogs and cats getting eaten by Haitian migrants and, Venezuelans coming in hordes. And how do you address that question with people?
I think in general, you can't divorce the reality of immigration from foreign policy. U.S. foreign policy has produced the level of migration that we're seeing. And when I say U.S. foreign policy, I mean sanctions. Venezuela has been sanctioned for over 20 years. Their assets have been frozen for the government, which means that the government has very small resources to do everything that it needs to do for its people. And so you cannot say that U.S. sanctions do not impact the possibility of Venezuelans being able to develop its nation state as they want and see fit and mitigate migration, because sanctions are not a thing. Sanctions are a huge impact to the economy of any country. And 1/3 of the world's population is under sanctions by the United States. Imagine that, 1/3. And so you have people from Venezuela, but you also have people from Eritrea, right next to Ethiopia, who are migrating because their country is under sanctions and experienced war that was backed by the US. The same thing with Cuba. Cuba has been under a blockade for over 60 years. $15 million a day are taken from the Cuban economy by the US. 15 million is a big number. We're talking about over $160 billion over the course of 60 years. And so this country and its US policy, its foreign policy, creates poverty and poverty levels in other countries that are unlivable. And so how can we expect not to see people migrate following the traces of the things that have been stolen from them, following the possibility of life? The same thing happens with Haitians. Haiti was the first free nation, the first free Black working class nation in this continent, 1804. France, the colonizers, they imposed sanctions and the United States backed them. And not only did they impose sanctions, they also asked for reparations and the United States backed them. You're going to ask for reparations from the body of people you enslaved? The United States is no different from France in that way. And so we need to understand what the United States has done in terms of war, occupation, building neo-colonies, a lot of neo-colonies. So dependent countries, countries that depend on the US to be able to do whatever it is that they do or don't do. You know, the IMF, the World Monetary Bank, those are instruments of the United States. And they indebt. Thomas Sankara spoke about this, how US imperialism has indebted the rest of the world to the extent that they have to continue to get loans to be able to live as nations, which is no different than what they do to us. In order for you to get a house, you got to get a 30-year-old loan. And if you can't pay it, guess what? You lose your house. That's what they do to nation states, exactly that. And so US foreign policy creates the level of migration. So our US foreign policy needs to be transformed, not on the basis of extraction, not on the basis of war, not on the basis of occupation, of dominance, but on the basis of solidarity and collaboration. The story of the men that I told you I met in Richland, South Carolina, that could have been prevented if we had a relationship with Cuba. If Cuba's medicine was accessible to the people in the United States, less people would be dying or would be getting their limbs amputated because they have diabetes. We could build based on learning from countries that are advancing technology rather than wanting to wage war with China. What is China doing that they got all this technology? Why do we have to launch a war to be able to get access and extract from them rather than let's build a collaboration? Let's see what we could learn. What can our experts learn from yours? And what can we teach yours? That could be part of our foreign policy. Our foreign policy could be one of solidarity. The United States has extracted and has depleted a lot of countries from Africa to the Middle East, to Asia, to the American continent. How do we restore the damage that we've caused? And that is through solidarity. And we have the ability to do that. You know, this idea of operating from a sense of lack. The United States is abundant. The United States is abundant in wealth and resources. The problem is that our wealth and our resources are being hoarded by the smaller minority of the population, which is 2% of the population, is the billionaire class. And so when we talk about migration, migration is as normal as day. It's always existed. What didn't exist before were borders. And although I think it's important for us to acknowledge, you know, each nation state has its policies, the policies of the United States is one that is based on criminalizing people for migrating. It's about exploiting migrants without having migrants have access or a path to normalizing their status. There's over 12 million people whose status is untouched, who don't have a path to citizenship. We believe there needs to be amnesty for those people because they're contributing every year to the economy of this country. $4 billion are contributed by undocumented immigrants in this country every year. Mm-hmm. They're contributing. Like, why should there be a difference between those who were born to undocumented immigrants and those who are contributing, who are workers in this country, who are, again, coming here following the traces of the things that have been stolen from them? It's reparations.
Yeah, I think history lessons are very much needed. And when we talk about like when these borders popped up, why these borders popped up, what the US's involvement in these other countries has been, yeah, like you said, once people have that information, it gives them a better sense of why people are fleeing their countries. You know, I forget who said it, but, you know, people don't leave their home unless the home is the mouth of a shark, something along those lines.
Yeah, of course. And the other thing is that capital is not policed. These countries make agreements with each other all the time. There was the Bracero program that actually brought farm workers and peasants from Mexico to be exploited in the United States. Mm-hmm. And that was okay. And they were sent back without any pay.
And before that, Mexican repatriation, sending, I think it was 2 million US born.
Yeah, all that. Yeah, and it happens all the time and all across, because capitalism is global. The same happens with the Dominican Republic and Haiti. The oligarchs have relationships, they talk to each other. The ruling class of these countries allow for migrants to come and go and be exploited. And then huge deportation drives are taken. And it's like a surprise for people. But it's like there was an opening to allow for people to come and be exploited at some point. And so we need to understand that, these borders, again, are created precisely to police us, the workers, but to exploit, allow the exploitation of our work, because that's what creates profit.
I wanted to ask a specific question about a policy that I think is really on the minds of a lot of people in this time, given that housing is so expensive. And I talked to some friends of mine. I have a friend who is actually going to be teaching about housing policy at a university. And I was asking him, like, well, how would you address this issue? Like, if we're talking about the levels of homelessness that we're seeing, families sleeping in their cars, people being priced out of their communities. If you and Karina were to win and get into office, what is your plan, or what would you suggest? And obviously this isn't like a snap your fingers, we fixed it, but what do you think needs to happen for the housing crisis to be addressed in this country? What are some of the key steps for that?
I mean, I think immediately we need to be able to stop financing war and the military industrial complex. And we could have the capital to do many things. That's one. But the second piece is that there was a report from United Way that came out not long ago that said that for every person who is homeless in the United States, there are 28 empty homes. It's not a matter of there not being homes or housing. I don't know, traveling all across the country, I've seen, especially in some very, like the biggest cities for the most part, you see empty developments just sitting there. Speculation, just, waiting for the market, waiting for the gentrification wave, just waiting, sitting there. Philadelphia, New York, Salt Lake City. All these cities are sitting on a whole bunch of different developments that are empty. It's not a lack of housing. We have housing to house people, but it's what kind of people are we waiting to house? And a lot of these buildings are part of management corporations. No longer is it like the old person that had that little family business, the landowner. Very few of those are left in these cities. What they have is management corporations that are connected to banks, that are connected to Wall Street. So Wall Street owns these management corporations that are raising the price of housing without any regulation, that are in so many ways producing the level of homelessness that we're witnessing. And so when we're talking about fixing or eradicating homelessness, we're talking about cutting out Wall Street. There's no reason why Wall Street, any bank, should have control of something that is a human right. There's no reason. It's a human right. People should have access to it. Therefore, landlordism, slumlords, and management corporations need to be eradicated. And they could be. They could be. And we need to start to imagine a society where we normalize housing people. And those places that are not developed, we're not developing these communities, or these, I'm talking about mostly like rural areas that also have seen an influx of a lot of people coming in from cities that they can't afford. How can we create and plan the development of these communities in a way that makes sense? Why should we not have in these areas something other than family tree, where people just get processed foods? Why wouldn't they have an actual supermarket or a farmer's market where they can actually get fresh food? Why do they have to travel so far to get healthcare? Thinking about planning in a way that makes sense to be able to sustain life. And so that is part of our vision. One, being able to divest from all these systems and structures that actually kill people, like war, like militarism, like the police departments, and invested in the development and construction of our communities in a way that makes sense for life. And it's totally possible. And again, making housing a human right means affordable and free. There are folks that need free housing, that need housing and getting on their feet because society has hit them that hard. People want to talk about drug addiction, but they don't want to treat. And they don't want to fix the conditions that force people into addiction. And so we need to create the conditions for people to become healthy. We live in a very sick society, in a very violent society that produces sick people and violent people.
Yeah, we have a system that likes to criminalize and push to the margins as opposed to look at what's the root cause. And yeah,
That's right.
that's what I appreciate about movements like what the Socialist Party is trying to do and what other progressive groups are trying to do to highlight this is where it comes from. And if we don't do something about that, then it's just going to keep coming back and hitting us in the face. So I wanted to just ask you just a couple more questions before we wrap up here. Obviously I'm hoping the best for you and Karina. And, I know Dr. Jill Stein on the Green Party is also running to try to take down this two-party duopoly. I think just pragmatically, it's hard to see what a victory looks like when you have such, like I said at the beginning, such massive forces up against you, right?
Mhm.
If you talk to people on the street, they see Democrat, they see Republican, and they don't know what else is out there. But I want to just ask you, 2025 rolls around, and if you guys were to win, pull off a win, what are some of the first things that y'all would want to do? And if you don't win, if it's 2025 and we got Kamala or Trump in office, what's the next move for y'all?
I'm gonna start with the last part of the question.
Mhm.
November 6th, we're gonna be doing the same thing we were doing before the election cycle: organizing, mobilizing, building the party, and building communities. Like I mentioned before, I've been an organizer for 30 years. That's not gonna stop now. That's my life. I've committed myself to the project of constructing socialism in this country and being in solidarity internationally with other countries that are doing so. So that's not going to change. If we were to win is a good question because it depends how we see winning. I like to do the exercise of divorcing myself from the capitalist logic. I think in so many different ways, the Vote Socialist campaign has won. We've won visibility. We've won the communities that we've gone into that we've never been in. We've won the imagination of so many young people who are able to say, we deserve more and we're willing to fight for more. For us, intervening in this election is way more than the capitalist logic of what is viable, because what is viable within capitalism is so limited. And we can't have a limited mentality. We deserve so much more because we contribute so much more. And we cannot be okay with mediocrity. And that's what this society offers us: mediocrity. And we should be okay with mediocrity. And we are unwilling to accept that offer. We deserve the world. Therefore, for me, winning is everything we've been able to do and everything that we will continue to do as organized people. If we were to win, right? Which for me is a matter of when we win, because if we continue to fight, we will win. I think that there's so many things to do. If 2025 were to be the year, we need to have a severing of our relationship with the colonial state of Israel. Many other countries has done it. We need to do it too. And we need to start abiding US international law that we so much like to impose on other countries and we don't like to take it off. So that's the first one. Stop all sorts of funding, all sorts of weapons being sent over to the colonial state of Israel. I think we need to be able to cut the military budget by 90%, which is also part of our platform. We start doing that, shutting down NATO, AFRICOM. It allows for other countries to do what they need to do and develop themselves independently from US empire. So US empire will feel the heat from the first days. I think we need to be able to engage communities in decision-making processes and how that would look like. There's a book that's called The Socialist Reconstruction that our party published, which is what we envision post a socialist revolution. How do we build society? What types of bodies and processes? Like, for example, there's Congress. Does it have a function? Does it function for the people? Does the Supreme Court function for the people? So there will be a process of thinking about deconstruction and reconstruction from the Constitution on. There is a question of immigrants that we talked about. We would start thinking and working towards amnesty and creating citizenship paths for people in ways that allows them to live without fear, and also in ways in which folks can have access to the most basic things, from housing to healthcare, because again, these are human rights. We talked about seizing the top 100 corporations. There's over 1 million corporations in this country that belong to billionaires. But seizing the top 100 allows for us to take the profit motive out of housing, out of healthcare, out of education, out of the pharmaceutical needs of people. It allows people to start democratizing their own workplace. So one of the businesses we have in our one of the corporations that we have in our platform or in our list of the top 100 is Amazon. Why is it that Jeff Bezos gets to steal $7.9 million a day, an hour, $7.9 million an hour in 2023? Why does he get to do that when you have over 2 million workers that are trying to negotiate $15 to $22 an hour? Rather than working in it to get a union to negotiate your exploitation, why not have a union from the moment you come into your workspace? And you come into a workspace where you have benefits and you could use the technology to advance the work without getting fired because there's a technology there. And you utilize the union to democratize your workspace, meaning organize production, manage the ways in which the company's running. A lot of these companies are being ran by people who've never spent a day as a worker, who are just collecting money off the work of the many people in the spaces. And so there's so many different things. The release of political prisoners. There's so many political prisoners. Leonard Peltier, Mumia Abu-Jamal. And I'm not talking about pardoning because they didn't do anything. They fought for the rights of people. It's how do we get them out and give them what they deserve as human beings, and that they potentially have a life after having sacrificed decades for us behind those walls. How do we dismantle mass incarceration? And all of it again is possible. People will start asking questions like, what do you do with Congress? What do you do with the Senate? All of it is a fight. And what we're talking about is not policies. What we're talking about is a complete reorganization of society, a complete redistribution of wealth. And it is possible because other countries with less resources have done it. The question is whether we are willing to do it too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's a tall order, Like you said, there's so much to do, but if we don't do it, then who will?
Who will?
Not now, when? Yeah, I appreciate you. And like you said, the fact that there are so many people who are resonating with this message, and there are young people who are finally looking for an alternative. They're not settling for what's on the table with the Democrats, with the Republicans, because they see through it. And the fact that we're able to present them with a message, a vision, a goal that they can actually fight for, I think that's powerful work. I want to just give you the last word. If there's any message that you have for the people here in Orange County that want to know why should they support this ticket?
Well, this is an invitation. The Vote Socialist 2024 campaign is an invitation to get people activated, to get people to understand that we have a lot of work to do, but that we can't do this work alone. And that there's an actual independent movement of working class people wherever there's a working class person, there's a potentiality of building socialism, because people have been so much brutalized by capitalism. They've been hurt so much by the system. And we can't only oppose we also have to propose. We can't only say, well, capitalism is evil without presenting people with an option. And for us, that option is socialism. So learning more about socialism, learning more about the construction of movement, and historically what that has meant to Orange County and to California and to the rest of the state, and how does it relate to the other states across the country, is very important. So this intervention for us is beyond the election cycle. So if you go and you support the ticket at the ballot box, we appreciate that. And we want this to be a commitment that goes beyond November 5th. We want this to be a commitment to building movement. We want this to be a commitment to building organizations. So if folks aren't organized, start organizing yourselves. Start building coalition. Because the reality is that regardless of who becomes the tenant of the White House, we will have to struggle. And struggle is the only guarantee we have to win. We won't win if we don't struggle.
The last thing, again, you're talking a lot about the importance of organizing and bringing all these different people together. I just want to, are there any people you want to shout out that you've seen around the country who are doing the kind of work that people might look to as template or example for what they might be able to try?
I mean, there's a lot of different organizations. There's obviously nonprofits that are doing work, that are service work, that is limited work. But when we're talking about political organization, we're talking about like SJPs. So Students for Justice in Palestine, that are student organizations, the Palestinian Youth Movement, which is also an organization around Palestine. But there's also the Party for Socialism and Liberation, which is the party that we're a part of. We're across 92 cities all across this country, doing organizing around housing, police brutality, mass incarceration, immigrant rights, reproductive justice, you name it. And we're with the labor movement as well. So we're across this country doing a whole bunch of stuff. There's also BAP, which is primarily a Black organization doing work around Black liberation. So there are many organizations out there. There's also, like, for folks that want to get independent media, there's Breakthrough News, that folks could, connect to. I co-founded an organization in New York that does a lot of political education that is hybrid. Folks can plug into the People's Forum, follow the People's Forum to get more information and connect to other organizers, not only in California or Orange County, but across the city and across the world, because a lot of the education that happens in the space is international. And so I think there's so many different avenues. And if there aren't organizations doing what you believe needs to happen, build an organization. Build an organization in relationship to folks that are doing and folks that are struggling and fighting.
All right. Well, thank you, Claudia. And again, best of luck to you and Karina as you move forward to Election Day.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the time.